And we can start now. Okay. So, welcome. And we are going to start today with a little Hayom Yom warm up. And the day today being Monday was the 2nd of Tevis, and we are coming into Tuesday being the 3rd of Tevis. So I just want to read the Hayom Yom from the 2nd of Tevis, and it turns out that it's very connected to our topic of what we're going to be discussing in the Tanya. So it's our um, reading brief Hasidic lesson in just a few lines. And by Hashgacha Pratik, by divine providence, it's going to be a great segue into what we're discussing in the Tanya right now. So the Hayom Yom reads like this. The campaign of the Greeks was aimed to make them forget your Torah, the Torah of Hashem, and violate the decrees of your will. In other words, Hashem's will. As the Midrash in Bereshit Rabbah puts it, that the Greeks demanded write, and what they had to do was actually write on the horns of their livestock, write that you have no share in the God of Israel. In other words, write that you and Hashem aren't in this intimate, special connection. Write that you have no share in the God of Israel. End of quote. It was a war against Hashem. Let them study Torah, the Greeks implied. Let them practice the justice mitzvot. In other words, things that made sense in terms of, civil law and things like that, and the testimonial observances. But they must not mention that the Torah is God's Torah and the mitzvot are decrees of his will. Torah and mitzvot must be severed from godliness. Okay, so that's the vort, and somehow in this Hayom Yom it says Teves second was the 7th day of Hanukkah, but as far as I understand, 2nd of Teves was the 8th day of Hanukkah. So it's very interesting that the Hayom seems to not have that. Maybe some years there's 30 days in Cheshvan, and some years there's 31, and maybe it changed a little bit year to year. But the point is that Hanukkah is that holiday that is fighting against Jewish people being forced to separate what they're doing from a spiritual consciousness. And the spiritual consciousness is of an awareness that everything that a Jew does when they're learning Torah and doing mitzvot is not just for the sake of feeling that they're doing things that are healthy for their body or they're learning an interesting intellectual study. The whole point of it is that it's in all of those mitzvot are in order to connect to God and have a godly experience. And so when we come into the Tanya, which we now in chapter 6 of the Tanya, we started discussing the animal soul. And we're halfway through chapter 6. And what we were talking about was the architecture of the animal soul. And we were saying that just like we have our godly soul, and there's a chokhmah, bina, and da'at aspect of the godly soul, that we think things through and we get inspired, and then we kind of create a vision, and then we act. In the animal soul, there's also chokhmah, bina, da'at, and then that chokhmah, bina, da'at, the inspiration, the understanding, and the knowledge of an idea gives birth to emotions and feelings that hopefully are positive emotions and feelings, the love and the fear of God. The same thing happens in the animal soul, that there's intention, inspiration to do something. Then there's the building up of that idea, and then there's the manifestation of that, and then they're all the emotions. But with the animal soul, as opposed to the godly soul, everything about those thoughts, those feelings, and those emotions, instead of being directed to serve God, they more directed with the direction is more self-serving. And we discussed the animal soul, and we spoke about it in a fair amount of detail. And we spoke about the fact that ultimately what defines the direction of the activities or the energy of the animal soul is that they're self-serving, and the direction and the energy of the godly soul is that it's not self-serving, it's altruistic, it's the energies of service, it's of helping others, bringing light into the world, seeing oneself as a part of a bigger picture. And that bigger picture is that we're serving God. We're trying to bring goodness and kindness and light and Hashem's will into the world. And it's not all about me, myself, and I. And the godly soul is much more orientated around my needs and my own self-awareness and the things I do to sustain me, feed my ego, and feed my sense of importance in the world. And then we were in the middle of chapter 6, and the Tanya said a very beautiful thing, though, that it said that every Jew, just by nature of being a Jew, has this capacity to transcend themselves, has this capacity to think about God, even though we might be sort of have a gravitational pull to self-orientation. Every Jew has a capacity to have what the Tanya calls bittul. And bittul is this capacity to see the picture, that the picture is actually bigger than you. The reality in the world is bigger than your little, small, self-concerned interest. And that every Jew has this. And even if a Jew is very unconscious, on a subconscious level, that Jew has the capacity to think of something, to be open to something other than itself. And I'll just read you, because we were learning and reading inside, and we were reading from Chaim Miller's definitions. And I'll just read it because he says it, I think, even better than I do. So in the Tanya's worldview, an experience of bittul, surrendering the ego to God, is a fundamental prerequisite to real living. In other words, this is the entire purpose of our spiritual life. And so we just had the holiday of Hanukkah. And in Hanukkah, we had an external force. We had the Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, saying to Jews, you can't be spiritually conscious. You can keep Yiddishkeit, you can be culturally Jewish, you can even do the mitzvahs, but for goodness sake, keep God out of it. Don't think about God all the time. Be more practical, rational, cultural, but keep God out of it. And so Hanukkah becomes this incredible personification of this voice or energy within ourselves that can detach our actions from actually being spiritually conscious and spiritually connecting our deeds and our actions to God. So you can even be a frum Jew, doing things, going through the motions, but if you're not internally connecting to Hashem, doing it in a way where you are not the most important character in the story. In other words, if you're lighting a menorah, and you're lighting a menorah in the public square, and you're doing this great thing, and you're thinking, wow, I hope everybody sees how motivated I am, and everybody sees how enthusiastic I am. As you're lighting that menorah, you could be completely directing your action not to Hashem. You're not saying, I hope that people here who are going to get inspired and who are going to get connected. You're thinking about your own self and your status. Then you're doing a mitzvah externally, but internally, you're not serving God. So the Hanukkah holiday is the personification of this external force. In Hanukkah, it's the Greeks, the Syrian Greeks, that external force that's trying to tell you don't do things for this abstract, they even said non-existent or not non-interested entity. And we saying that's the point of your whole life, to make your own self-concern smaller and direct your activities to something other than you, make that part of yourself much bigger. So I'll carry on reading. So this surrendering of the ego to Hashem is a fundamental prerequisite to real living. It represents the departure from a personal consciousness that attributes separate existence to the self, to gradually embrace a transpersonal vision that sees all existence as embedded in a universe saturated with the divine. So I'm going to just summarize. That's a beautiful sentence, but it kind of, okay, tell me in English.
I actually was going to say, can you repeat that? But I was
Yeah.
on
Okay, thank you.
mute.
I'm just going to say, Bracha Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shakol nivaro. So there is a person on the line who I don't know if it's Melissa or not. It's 1732 to whoever that is, if you want to identify yourself, but I'm very happy to have you on the line. But anyway, I'll explain that word. So everything, who is that?
Shoshana.
Oh, it's Shoshana. Okay, I'm so happy that you're there. I didn't recognize your phone number. Okay, beautiful. I'm really happy that you're there. Okay. So I'm going to translate the sentence that I just read. So the whole of Tanya has been an effort to say that our life is a game of hide and seek. Hashem hid away, and our job is to find him. That's to take all of Shar Yichud Ve'emunah into one sentence. And Shar Yichud Ve'emunah went into great detail saying how in order for Hashem, who is this all-encompassing, powerful, light-filled, wisdom-filled entity, to create a world where we have free choice, Hashem had to hide his light in progressive steps of a step-down process, hiding his light more and more, hidden. As we go through the worlds, his light gets more and more hidden, and the light that we are able to perceive gets more and more, hidden. So as that light gets more and more hidden, eventually we come to our world where Hashem's light is so hidden that we could actually have the illusion that we exist as separate entities from God. We just here. We're not part of anything bigger than us. We're not part of God. We're independent existences. We stand alone, and we have a great army, and we're very wise, and we're very smart, and we can accomplish things all by ourselves. That's the ultimate klippah. That's the ultimate buying into the story of separation. And what I just read in that beautiful sentence is that the whole point of life is for you to realize that's not the truth. That even though Hashem carefully hid himself in progressive levels of hiding, actually there is no other reality besides God permeating everything. And it's our job to try and get out of our self-awareness and our self-consciousness and thinking that we're the most independent and important thing in the story, and realize that it's all God and we're just part of that story. Do you understand what I just said now, Susan?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'll read it again. In the Tanya's worldview, an experience of bittul, surrendering the ego to God, is a fundamental prerequisite to real living. It represents the departure from a personal consciousness, me, that attributes separate existence to the self. I just came from my parents, and my existence has nothing to do with Hashem, to gradually embrace a transpersonal vision. It's all about God. It's much bigger than me, and sees all existence as embedded in a universe saturated with the divine. So I get to the point where I understand ein od milvado. There's nothing else that exists in the world except God. I'm just a representation of that. We all God dressing up in different manifestations. There's a costume that looks like Susan, and a costume that looks like Dina Bracha, and an aspect of God that looks like Shoshana, and an aspect of God that looks like me. But we all just God acting out in an embodied way in the world. But really, the more we can get rid of our ego, the more we opening to that truth. I'm going to continue reading. Any shift of the animal's soul in this direction, which is it's almost like the idea that the Tanya talks about are klippahs, shells. So imagine you're a tangerine and you've got a nice peel of tangerine peel wrapping around you, and someone starts opening the peel. As soon as that peel starts opening and light starts to shine in, that's the beginning of the waking up process of, oh, there's actually a bigger picture than me. So that's what I'm going to read now. Any shift of the animal soul in this direction, that there's a bigger picture, whether it be a mere willingness to listen to a higher truth, even a little thing of, wow, I guess it is really different than what I thought all this time, me, just a mere willingness to listen, a purely cerebral appreciation of Shem's presence, or a total realignment of being, it's all bittul. Whether you totally go to the absolute extreme and say, I'm garnished, I'm nothing, I'm only God, or you just have a little bit of a awareness that the picture is a little more complex than I thought. It's all bittul. Once bittul has begun, and this word bittul means you make your ego smaller in order to make your awareness of God bigger. Once bittul has begun, the ego is punctured and divine light can start to seep through the cracks. And now this is the whole purpose of our life, for the bittul to open and for the light to flood in. That's why that Leonard Cohen song is so great, that through the broken heart, that's what lets the light come into the cracks. Because when you so self-reliant and everything's cool, then how does that bittul come? You get broken, and the more you're broken, the more you open to the light, which is unfortunately why Hashem makes us suffer, because we get so distant in our arrogance when we feel like we're so omnipotent, and then Hashem unfortunately kind of breaks through that klippah and hurts us or makes us vulnerable, and then we crack open, and then we're like, oh my God, there's a God in the world. I'm so small. I need to cry out to Hashem. And so in the recording that I heard recently from Sarah Yehudit Schneider, she said, what is the definition of Geula, of Mashiach, is when we start learning through joy, when we don't have to be cracked open through suffering to reach that point of surrender, because we're so crushed and pummeled that our peels start coming off and we open like a beautiful, say, tangerine fruit or a lotus flower. We start opening to the truth of the bigger picture, not through suffering, but through pleasure and joy. That's going to be a great shift that's going to come with Geula. So once bittul has begun, the ego is punctured and divine light can start to seep through the cracks, intensifying the experience of bittul, which can occur at many levels And that requires a lifetime of spiritual work. The more you let the light in and the less of the me, I, me, I you have, the more spiritually evolved you become. Bittul opens an individual to Hashem, regardless of whether it's an act of conscious bittul, as it is always the case with the supernal angels, who are constantly enraptured by Hashem's presence, or even if the bittul lies dormant. So an angel is very bittul. They only do what they're commanded by Hashem. We much more sophisticated than an angel. We have free choice. An angel doesn't. God says to the angel, jump. The angel just says, how high? God says to a person, jump. And the person says, well, why should I? Maybe there are better things I could be doing. So Sarah Yehudit Schneider gave an incredible explanation of free choice. She said, God pulled himself back and he holds himself back. So there's space in which we have space to choose. That's the whole reason why we have an interesting life. Okay, so bittul opens an individual to Hashem, regardless of whether it's an act of conscious bittul, as it is always the case with the angels, or even if the bittul is dormant. And this is what I started saying before I went into the text. The lowest level of bittul is subconscious. Just by being a Jew and alive, even if you're the most arrogant Jew on the face of the planet, there's still a level of bittul that you have, but it's subconscious. Merely possessing a divine soul means that you have the potential for bittul dormant in your being, because that's the gift of having a divine soul. This is always true of every person in Israel, down here in this world, who by virtue of his or her divine soul has the potential for complete surrender to Hashem by giving his or her life in martyrdom for God. So this last part is what we saw with all the hostages and a lot of the survivors from Nova, that they were totally secular. I mean, I don't want to say totally secular. They weren't halachically observant. They were at a festival, it wasn't a shul service at Nova. And especially the people that were in the tunnels and in the being hostage, they didn't go into those situations feeling how big God is and how small they are. But when they were pushed by circumstance and really pushed, the surrendering, the breaking open, the total, like they have nothing else. One man was sitting in darkness for almost 700 days and starts talking to God because his whole ego reality totally shatters. So even a person who didn't learn anything, this is exactly what happens, that every person in Israel has the potential for complete surrender to Hashem. And we saw with the hostages, they didn't have to martyr themselves, but their life as they knew it was completely taken from them. They had nothing of what constitutes an egoistical life. They didn't have friends, they didn't have careers, they just had their neshama. That's all they had. And what did that neshama do? It started to seek and find and engage with God. And they came out with mostly bittul and very little self. That was what was so amazing of seeing what that whole story was quite astounding. So before I carry on, does anybody want to say something? Because I've been talking a lot and I sounded very excited, but does anyone
No, it's just
comment?
very cute that Becky brought her students pistachios and oranges to do the klippah thing,
Oh,
She's
yeah,
just
well, because it's very clear. You take the shell off a pistachio, it's very cracky and solid. And who wants to eat the shell? You don't want to eat the shell. And the same with the tangerine. It's really beautifully protected with that nice shell. And inside is the soft, juicy, fragile fruit. So the shell obviously played a role in protecting what was inside. But if you want the fruit, You have to peel off the peel. And nobody wants to eat the peel. We want to get to the fruit.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments before we carry on? Yes, no, no, yes.
Yeah, I have comments, but I don't know that it's important. I mean, I don't think we're supposed to nullify ourselves. I don't understand that language in terms of my own understanding of our connection with Hashem. So I'm not able to take that in. I think we're supposed to make it's pretty obvious Hashem is in charge of everything. We're supposed to make a connection. I don't think we're supposed to pursue nullification. I don't get that at all.
Well, the nullification concept is to step out of the way.
I understand, but I don't like the
you don't
nullification.
nullify all parts of yourself. You nullify the ego that is saying that I am a separate existence from my creator, that I don't need
Right, but I think the language can be very misleading. We're not supposed that's a sacrifice of a different nature, and it's just uncomfortable for me to think that, because we're supposed to be filled from our connection with Hashem, rather than
you're filled with your connection from Hashem, but if you're too filled with yourself, you're not making space.
Well, self, right? I understand. It's just a language thing.
Okay.
It's just, yeah.
All right. Okay.
I don't think most people even grasp where or what or who, their ego is. No, people don't really have a sense of that.
Well,
but that's a whole different thing.
I think where we can encounter the ego, for example, it says that anger is the biggest avodah zarah. Why is anger the biggest avodah zarah? Because
money.
Well, I'm talking about anger right now. So let's say a person is stuck in a traffic jam and they're stuck at the red light, and then somebody cuts in front of them and they get so angry and they're shouting at this person, why did you cut in front of me? And I've got to get somewhere and you cut in front of me and blah, blah, blah. Or for whatever reason, somebody steals money from them or somebody does something and they get angry. So the Torah says that anger is an avodah zarah. Why? Because if you're a God-fearing person in the fully correct way that the Torah wants you to be a God-fearing person, then you don't get angry. You say, oh, Hashem is trying to show me something and he wants me to learn from this, and I better figure out why he wanted someone to cut in front of me, why he wanted me to be late for my meeting, why he wanted someone to stand on my toe, why he wanted someone to do such and such to me. If I'm angry, it means that somehow I think that God is not in charge of the world and things are happening to me that I have the right to get angry about. And I am full of my I in that moment. In that situation, the idea is, how can you get angry? We're living in a world where everything is orchestrated from above, and instead of directing your anger that something happened, how could this happen? It shouldn't have happened. I'm angry about it. It's like, okay, Hashem wanted me to learn this lesson. I'm just part of this classroom. And what do I learn from it? So as soon as there's an I'm angry. I think this shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have gone this way. That's a person feeling themselves and feeling their own experience, not in context of seeing the bigger picture. That's just an example, I think. So I don't know if that speaks to you, but okay. So
well, whatever. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So let's carry on. So in its unenlightened state, my animal soul can appreciate only tangible reality. It lacks the tools to modify that perception, to see itself as divine and sense the pulsating divine energy that lies beneath the world's veil. Therefore, it mistakenly sees its own existence as separate from God. So this is very important. This is the distinction of feeling connected, that we're part of that step down process, or we we separate, and this is going to be very important. In what appears to be an utterly fragmented world, it follows the path of self-preservation and self-interest. My divine soul, on the other hand, sees right through the false exterior of things and intuits the fundamental interconnectedness of reality and its divine energy. So my challenge is to lift myself from the superficial, fragmented consciousness of my animal soul to the more penetrating, unified perception of my divine soul. Okay, so now, so getting back to this idea of Mesirat Nefesh, which is self-sacrifice. I mentioned on the Hanukkah Verbringen this idea of hearing many times the idea of Mesirat Nefesh, that you do something where you're disregarding your self-interest for the sake of for God. And there's a big thing in Chabad Hasidus for sure, and maybe in other Hasiduses too, this aspect of I don't do what's good for me, I do what's good for the mission of teaching Torah or the mission of proclaiming, my pride in my Judaism or whatever, even if it's going to endanger me in some way. So it says, so that's also connected to this bittul. So, but then it's the Tanya says that okay, so let's just go on here. So how does evil exist? Where does the energy? So all of this Tanya has been what I call or Chaim Miller calls the architecture of the soul. We have a godly soul, we have an animal soul. Now we're looking at that animal soul, and that animal soul is really, we're focusing more on the peel and the shell of the fruit now than the fruit itself. So let's look at it and be a little technical, because the Tanya is a little technical, and it's going to tell us of different kinds of klippah. Klippah is this concept of shell that conceals the godly light in some way. So an entity which lacks bittul cannot be a vessel for Hashem's holiness. So if you don't want to call bittul self-nullification and you want to call it something else, but the bittul is the thing that's kind of asserting its own bigness as opposed to making space. So entity which lacks bittul cannot be a vessel for Hashem's holiness. Anything, however, which has not surrendered its ego to Hashem and perceives itself a separate entity to itself will not receive its life energy from God's holiness. So now it's going to be a very tricky thing. If Hashem permeates everything in the world, and if a person hasn't activated their capacity to see godliness, let's say they completely in their egoistic, God denying, selfish, ego serving self, how do they get nourished? How do they get energy? What's feeding them? What's animating them? How are they nourished? So to solve this problem, the Tanya offers us a Kabbalistic insight into how evil forces come to exist. In contrast to the holy and the pure, which emanate directly from Hashem, the evil and impure are also sustained by Hashem's light, but indirectly so. So the image that I've always had about this, and my primitive image was recently exchanged for a more sophisticated image, but somehow at this moment I can only remember the more primitive image. And the more primitive image is that, let's say you have a good relationship with a teacher or a mentor or a parent or something, and they give to you face to face. You want food, you want love, you want attention. They give it to you, and it comes from their open-heartedness, and they're giving it to you with a full heart, open-handedly, face to face. So that's kind of the energy that when we want to do good things, we're fed by Hashem's energy in that way. He's feeding us and sustaining us, and we're receiving directly from him. But what happens if we're doing bad things? What happens if we clipper people and we're doing clipper actions? So it says that really what we get is that we get it almost from Hashem, taking it from behind. And almost like this parent is giving to a child that they're not so happy with. And instead of giving it to them face to face with a full and open heart, they're sort of passing it behind without really, without a graciousness. It's kind of giving behind their back. That's the kindergarten version. The kindergarten version is Hashem is giving to you behind your back. The more sophisticated understanding of this analogy of God giving you something from behind is if we think about where do we get our energy from? Are we sustained truly with things that nourish us and that help us thrive and develop spiritually and evolve spiritually? Or do we get fed by things that are really not good for us and that are really feeding negative traits within ourselves? So I think the simplistic explanation, and I'm going to read it inside, is that Hashem gives from his behind. He gives behind his back, so to speak, to feed the clipper aspect in us. But the more sophisticated understanding is, what kind of nourishment do we take in to feed ourselves? Do we take nourishment from aspects of Hashem and goodness and kindness in the world that has more godly light revealed in it? Or are we sustaining ourselves from energy where godly light is very concealed? And as a result, we will become a product of that more concealed energy. And before you ask a question, and maybe I would like you to ask a question, I have an analogy. For example, if you get your hashkafa in life from Torah classes, from holy people, from Torah teachers, from Torah books, from godly source material, your consciousness and your awareness is going to be expanded, and you're going to be inspired, and you're going to want to serve Hashem. So you can say Hashem is feeding you in an open-hearted way. If you take your energy and your nurturance and your information and your inspiration from all the nonsense, let's say, the hate spewers and the prejudiced people and the ignorant people, and they spewing garbage and you just swallowing it up. So then you're taking energy into yourself that has godliness concealed. And so as you nourish yourself, you're getting much less godly light in what you're consuming, and you end up feeding the clipper aspect of yourself and not the expanded aspect of yourself. Let me just read that inside, and then if you have any questions, ask me the question. Or do you want to ask me the question first? No, I'll read first. Okay. So when you greet a friend with a warm smile, then you greet your friend and you have a warm smile and everything's nice. But when you meet someone you don't like, it might be hard to look them in the face and you might want to turn your back on them. That's what I was saying, this other thing. So the life force of impure things descends from its initially holy source It goes step by step, down, down, down. And the more the godliness in that thing gets concealed, the lower down it goes, right? The more dense of a source of information it becomes, goes more dense, more dense, more dense, till it's really on the bottom of the line. Do you want to feed off stuff that has the godliness in it so concealed? That's kind of being a bottom feeder, right? You, like a lobster, you're eating at the ocean floor, all the garbage that's on the floor of the ocean. So it descends step by step, tens of thousands of times through the spiral of spiritual worlds, and it is diminished. This is the life force in this thing or in this object. It's diminished many times through cause and effect to the point where its divine light and energy has been so diluted that it can be diminished, garbed, and exiled into something that seems to have no connection to God itself. And to energize and sustain that thing's existence from nothing to something, it's all it's got. It's only got enough life force that it can exist in the world. That's all the divine energy that's left in the thing. It's gone so far down on the ladder of more concealed, more concealed, more concealed, more concealed, more concealed, that if it went any lower on the ladder, it would cease to exist. It has to have some divine energy in it for it to exist, but it's very, very concealed. And so that's really what Sitra Achra is and Klippa is. It's things that conceal God's light. God's light is there, but it's so concealed, so diminished that it's almost hard to find God's light in that thing. And then it will talk about within us, maybe we won't do this tonight, but within us, we have we ourselves, our own architecture, we have different klippot. We have certain klippot that are just there's certain klippot that are, or not within us, let's say in the world, there's certain things that are so they're so klippa dick that we can't get any divine light out of them.
You
For
know what comes to
example,
mind?
food that's not kosher, right? Like a piece of pig. It's got so much klippa that the divine light in it is inaccessible to us, so we can't eat it. Or certain actions, those actions are not allowed. We can't do them because those actions have no divine light in them. We can't elevate them. They can't feed us at all. Or certain food, let's say there's a law that you can't mix certain vegetables, you can't graft, you can't like mix two species of foods. If you mix them even when they in seed, you're not allowed to eat you're not allowed to create such food.
Which is a lot of food now. Almost all food
Well,
is
it's complicated.
bioengineered.
Right. Well, I guess it's if you do it yourself, I don't know how to go. But just let's say there's food that for some reason or other you're not allowed to eat it. So for you, there's the life force, the godly life force in that thing is so concealed, you can't get at it, right? You can't access it. It can't be elevated. So that's klippa food or klippa action.
You
Sorry,
know what
Susan,
comes
you
to
wanted
mind,
to say
Bracha?
something. Yeah.
I have a sister-in-law. She's not Jewish, and she learns deep Kabbalah and spheres, and she's been learning with a guy who my brother loves to say has 5 PhDs, and she may know a lot factually, but it doesn't come down into light or Torah knowledge. It feels like the klipa thing. It feels like there's not godliness in it, and it's taking them not in a necessarily good direction. I don't know, just that came to mind. I never understood how you can learn so much Torah and be so unaffected. It's not real.
Well, it's exactly what the Greeks wanted. They wanted
Mm,
us to learn Torah the way people learn maths or science
mm.
or astrology. In Korea, for example, they love Gomorrah. They think it sharpens their mind and their deductive skills. They love Torah
I've heard.
learning.
Yeah.
But for the Jewish person, the whole point of it is it's a revelation of God and God's way of thinking and God's way of ordering the universe. And, unfortunately, Jewish people can study Torah and not make that connection also. That's the challenge, is to do these things. That's really why we started with the Hayom Yom, to do these things with an intention of connecting to God through these things. So just before we end, I just want to say there's klippah, different kinds of klippot, and the things that are not kosher, the forbidden things, the actions that are completely forbidden. Those are the klippot that cannot be elevated. But then there's another kind of klippah. It's called klippah noga, which Chaim Miller translates as bright klippah, which is
Right?
interesting. Be like bright, like shiny, like bright klippah. And that is a neutral kind of a klippah, which is very interesting.
Like
For
what?
example, if you do something like shake a lulav, that's a mitzvah. If you go to the mikveh, that's a mitzvah. If you light Shabbos candles, that's a mitzvah. But what happens if you're just eating your dinner on a Wednesday night? Is that a mitzvah, or is that I'm just stuffing myself because I'm an egotistical person? So the Tanya says that actually there's a lot of neutral things that are not mitzvot and they're not averas. They're neutral actions. Sorry, let me correct myself. They are potentially neutral actions. But then the Tanya says a very radical thing. It says, but in actual fact, there is no such thing as a neutral action. Klippah noga means that the action can go either way, depending on your intention. So if Wednesday night you're very hungry and you come to the table and you sit and you eat in a certain way, that way of eating could be you serving your animal soul. Or you could sit down at the same Wednesday night and you could eat the same food and you could be thinking, I want to elevate this food so that I have energy to learn Torah and serve Hashem and be an Eved of Hashem. And I'm doing this, and I'm not saying that for sure we're talking about the fact that the food's kosher. And we've even maybe gotten to the level where you've said a bracha, but saying a bracha on the food is already making it already more on the Kedusha side. But there's a lot of actions that Tanya says that if you don't put kavona into your neutral actions, the weight of gravity of doing things for yourself is so normal and natural that neutral actions have a tendency to just self-serve, that you have to have special intention really to have in mind that I'm serving Hashem in what I'm doing. Now,
Are you able to do that?
I was just about to say that's pretty intense level. Like, I feel like if you're just in harmony and you're in a good mood and you're living and feeling like in general your life is of service to Hashem, but the Kabbalists used to literally say, L'Shem, Kudshe, Brichu, I'm doing this thing to unite, the names of God, I'm doing this thing, I'm doing this thing. I don't know. I mean, this is a level that it's talked about in the Tanya. I don't know. Do I do that on a regular basis? I can't say that I do. Should we do that? There's the famous story of Hillel, and his students said to him, "Where are you going?" And he said, "I'm going to do a mitzvah." And they said, "Well, teacher, Rebbe, what mitzvah are you going to do?" And he said, "I'm going to the bathhouse. I'm going to take care of my goof." And that's a mitzvah. And they said, "But Rebbe, you're going to the bathhouse? Why is that a mitzvah?" And he's like, "It's a mitzvah to take care of your body." So I think there's a big line of how seriously one can take this. But the Tanya is saying that that there is no neutral action, really. That if you trying to keep healthy so that you can serve Hashem, do mitzvahs in the world, be a happy person, maybe that's enough. Maybe people are doing things. I think what the Tanya is trying to do, and it's a subtle level, and I don't know if I am comfortable about this to talk about it more, but the Tanya is saying, klippa noga things that are not mitzvahs and they're not averas, that's the realm of service. That's the realm where you consciously are either God directed in your awareness and your consciousness, or you are more selfishly directed. Maybe we'll have to speak more about that, but it's an interesting thing because that's the level of klippa
The
noga.
word,
That's not
the word
overtly.
ego and the word selfish really troubles me because I don't think it's one or the other. I think those are extremes and it's black and white. And I think one cannot serve Hashem if one doesn't have healthy respect for oneself. You just can't. It's not even possible to learn Torah if you're constantly self-defeating and flagellating. I don't know. I
I
mean,
think that
ego is something, that whole word was something, designed and created by Freud, and I'm not sure. I'm just saying,
I think
I
that
don't think
maybe
it's
you've
valid.
maybe
I
you've
don't like the idea of self-nullification because, and I think it's perfectly fine if one wants to live in that practical sense of taking care of your body. That is absolutely serving Hashem.
I
He created your body. You are serving him.
I
And if that's
absolutely
the level
no,
that people can commit to, there's nothing wrong with that.
I
And
I
you,
think
you know,
I think that maybe you're misunderstanding
no,
what
I
I
don't think
said
I did.
about Bittel because I'm not talking about self-flagellating, and I'm not
But I
talking.
am. I'm saying it can lead to that.
I
And you have to have a healthy sense to be able to learn Torah and to do things in the world.
I
And that's
think
not
that's true.
necessarily a bad thing. That's good.
I think it's good to have to okay, let's self-flagellation I think is not a healthy thing. And I think when I'm talking about Bittel, I'm not saying that it should be self-flagellation or taking or putting oneself. I think that I think that a person, especially in our day and age before Mashiach, where we learning to how important the body is, we're learning to listen to the body, we're learning that the body has information, we're learning to take care of it in more ways, we're learning emotionally we have to take care of ourselves. I don't think that anything that I was attempting to share is not in sync with those ideas of a
Critical. This
healthy
is
way of
something
being.
that's, I'm
But
not trying to be critical. This is just something that's come up for me before with Tanya. Okay, so it's really not about your explanation.
well, I
Thank you.
think that what the Tanya is trying to say is that generally, energetically, there's different ways that our energy can orientate. The energy can orientate towards me, myself, my needs, my well-being, my entity, my position in the world, or the energy can be radiating outwards to, I want to be of service. Of course, if you want to be of service, you have to have a healthy body. You have to eat healthy food. You have to take yourself to the bathhouse. You have to maybe go to the gym, do yoga, do breathing, eat healthy food, do whatever you need to do. But your orientation is, I'm not here just for myself. I'm here for a bigger purpose. What I think that Tanya was saying is that there's an energy of the animal soul, which is more like if you imagine a dog, a loving, sweet dog, but a dog, it needs to eat, it eats, it needs to sleep, it sleeps. It's you stand on its tail, it'll bite you. It's a self, or it can be very loyal and loving, but many animals, that's why it's called an animal soul, are kind of preoccupied with their physical needs. The godly soul is preoccupied with something bigger than itself. And what the Tanya is saying is that there's two different directions of energy.
I
And the
understand.
direction of energy of the animal soul,
And
is more of self-protection, of self-serving. The energy of the godly soul is more of other direction. And it's saying that in order for
Going to get us anywhere, because I mean, in my understanding, we need both, and that we need both for survival and
no one's
connection.
denying that. That's the whole point of why Hashem gave us two souls. He gave
Why
us
he
an
gave us.
animal soul and he gave us a godly soul. What the Tanya is doing, we spent a few chapters talking about the godly soul. Now the Tanya is trying to define what is the animal soul. And then it's saying that the purpose of life is to try and bring a consciousness of the bigger picture to the animal soul, and that's the purpose of spiritual avoda, to transcend the animal soul. That's the purpose of the godly avoda. But for sure, if there isn't an animal soul and you're not at all concerned with survival and you don't eat and you don't take care of yourself, that's also no good. And there's even a story when they said, let's banish the Yetzer Hara, banish the animal soul, just banish it. And there were no eggs, there was no and there was no procreation, no children. It's a why are there no eggs? Well, there was no Yetzer Hara, there was no inclination
Right.
so, of course, we're not saying if there's no animal soul, then there's angels. We created in the world with an animal soul and a godly soul. What we were doing was trying to define the differences of each one, and nobody's saying that one doesn't exist, doesn't have a purpose.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. And I'm really happy that we all were here to discuss these things. As I say, these are not the last words on the matter. They're just my effort to try and understand them to the best of my ability. But
you're doing really well.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. Have a good night. Sei gesund.
Not here often. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
Have a good night. Bye.
Good night.